Okay, hello everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Ryan Cordy. I'm the Vice President of Consulting Services at Intellius, and I'd like to thank you all for joining today's webinar, Preparing for Your Global HR Implementation. Whether you're new to GHR, just starting to explore GHR as a possible solution, or gearing up for an implementation, I think you'll find today's content will help answer questions and help you along your way towards working more with GHR. We want to start out today with some quick introductions and then jump into details on the HCM Cloud Suite applications. We'll then discuss some reasons why upgrading or implementing can provide benefits to your organization, and then discuss how you can prepare and plan for the project. We'll finish with a live demo of delivered functionality around hiring a resource, and close out with any questions you might have for the Intellius team. As I mentioned, I'm Ryan Cordy, and joining me today is Allison Hoffman, our Director of Consulting Services. Allison has roughly 15 years of Infor Lawson delivery experience and is our subject matter expert for Infor HCM. She's been working with GHR and talent management since those products have been in their infancy, and has a deep understanding of the value this set of modules can add to any organization. Okay, just a little bit about us. Intellius is an Infor Alliance partner based out of Dallas, Texas. We've been around since 1999 and specialize in all things Infor Lawson. As an Alliance partner, we offer a full set of consulting services, including new implementations, adding new modules to existing instances, upgrades, cloud migrations, and a full set of both technical and application services support. In addition to our consulting services, we offer a line of our own proprietary software solutions that can complement Infor's existing set of applications. If you'd like to learn more about any of these services or our software products, I invite you to visit our website or contact us after the webinar, and we'd be glad to set up a follow-up call. As I mentioned before, there will be questions at the end, but if you want to, please use the online chat, and we'll monitor those throughout and log those and answer at the end. And now I'd like to introduce Allison Hoffman, who's going to talk with us about what you really came to hear about today.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So welcome, everyone. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Allison Hoffman. I'm one of the delivery directors at Intellius. And just to give you a little bit of background on my experience with GHR and talent management, I actually was part of an implementation dating back to GHR version 3, and I've played various roles in these types of projects, including development, leading data conversions, leading system configuration, and project management. So let's start here by taking a look at the terminology used with Infor today, specifically Cloud Suite HCM. You know, this is probably a term that you've heard over the past few years, but what does this really mean? Essentially, Cloud Suite HCM describes a grouping of existing Infor products, such as Global HR, or you'll hear me today refer to it as just GHR, talent management, Lawson Human Resources management, which is also known as Lawson S3, workforce management, etc. So the underlying applications and technology of all these are similar to prior releases, but when you hear Cloud Suite HCM, you're basically just hearing, you know, this is all these products bundled up as one. One thing we like to note here is that while the name indicates cloud, Cloud Suite HCM can be deployed either on-premise or in the cloud. So this slide here depicts the modules and components of Global HR and Talent Management, which are core pieces, as we just saw, of Cloud Suite HCM. While there's multiple boxes on this slide and it looks like different systems, this is truly one system, both Global HR and Talent Management on one system with various modules. Some of you may, over the past few years or even prior to that, you may have heard, you know, all of HR called Talent Management, with GHR being a module. You know, the functionality hasn't changed per se. It's just how Infor is, you know, kind of grouping this and, you know, saying that this is Cloud Suite HCM, it includes these components. So it's just how everything's labeled and organized. So if we start on the left side here, Global HR is the core data and setup. So this includes your foundational structure, your jobs, your positions, your managers, your codes, and of course your resources. There's some other modules included under Global HR, such as benefits, absence, some of the smaller ones like occupational health, employee safety, etc. Then over on the right, we've got our talent management, which includes talent acquisition, which is probably the biggest one within that, and really the true talent modules for your resources. So, tracking my resources' performance, having them define goals, thinking about their learning and development, all that stuff that makes a true talent system. Many organizations, they do implement that organ person structure box along with talent acquisition in phase 1. That's not to say you have to do it that way. That's just what we see a lot of customers do. The one thing you do have to do, though, is start with your organ person structure in your first phase. I always like to say if we could, make these boxes really show the time and complexity of each module, that organ person structure would be pretty big. This is the true foundation of your HCM system, and you have to have that in first before you start implementing other things, or you can implement that alongside other things. So I assume many of you on the phone are considering or already planning to implement GHR and talent management. So let's talk through some of the reasons why this is beneficial for your organization. First off, GHR essentially forces you, in a good way I think, to go digital through the use of its delivered action requests. And these essentially automate your business processes such as hire, rehire, terminate. So for those of you using paper today, or maybe you're just entering something in PA 52, this takes it to the next level. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, we'll take a look at that hire action request in the demo towards the end of the presentation. Next up, many clients are faced with the challenge of storing their non-employees or their contractors, basically anybody that's not paid. And, really the only place to store that in Lawson S3 is in HR 11. And as you know, there's not a lot of flexibility with that screen, and we've seen a lot of customers have to use dummy values and or convoluted processes for these non-paid resources. GHR is much more flexible. It really allows you to store any type of resource you please. This is why I think they're named resources in GHR versus employees, so you'll start to hear that term more. The number of required fields is less, and you also have the ability to choose which resources to send back to S3 payroll or outside to ADP, etc., through the use of relationship codes. So again, there's just a lot more flexibility in how you can set up your resources, and you're not constrained to, all these required fields. And then the last thing on this slide is you're able to define an organizational structure that's not tied to finance. You can have as many levels as you like in your structure. And I put just a quick example here, and you can see at the bottom we've got our location levels. And of course, the people sit down there. So they are tied to a location, organization unit, which will have your cost center information. It will have your chart of accounts. It will have all that information you need to send to GL, to send to payroll, to send to outside systems. But you're not left with just organization units that you attach people to. You can have your locations reporting to your divisions, which report to your regions, which report up to your organization. And this just allows you to have a much more flexible, reporting, analytics, and really just from a visual perspective too, you're able to see your true organizational structure. And this is something you can also see in the system. Once you build your organizational structure, there's a way to actually view it in the system. So GHR and talent management, the user experience is driven by roles. I like to think about this as there's no longer just one HR 11 that everyone types into the search box and goes to and sees. There's a resource form that tailors its look and feel to the role you are assigned to. The navigation is also designed to the role and allows for a greater user experience because of this. So for example, a generalist is going to navigate to and experience something very different than a recruiter. And you can see in the screenshots here, recruiters have navigation by default where they're immediately able to go to their candidate pool, their requisitions, their resources, etc. Where a generalist who's plays a very different role than a recruiter has access to all these other modules right on the top of their screen. Now these roles are delivered by Infor and of course configurable by you, but we find that Infor has done a really good job of, again, tailoring these roles and the user experience behind it, that a lot of customers are pretty happy with how this stuff is out of the box. Now there are also embedded analytics in the system functionality. So you're able to export data directly from a list to CSV, or you can modify that list with the use of personalizations, which we'll talk about in a minute here. And then to touch on the last two, GHR and talent management, they are mobile enabled. This is part of the core design and user experience, not something that was added in later. When Infor was designing and developing these, they were taking mobile into consideration. And lastly, as I mentioned when we look at that slide with all the boxes, this is a true talent management system. It's not just your core applications. It, of course, includes your core HR, but it also has those true talent modules for you to implement. So GHR and talent management really allows you to grow and better your workforce. So one of the newer features within GHR that we wanted to call out is the built-in auto user provisioning. This was released in 11.0.1, and with just a few simple setup steps, you can configure the system to automatically create users or assign standard roles on a hire or rehire. Another example of something you can do is disable actors and unassign roles on terminate. So you can see in the first screenshot here that actors will be provisioned, and actors are users. Actors will be provisioned automatically during hire and rehire, and they will be assigned that employee_ST role. And essentially that role is the delivered standard role. Then the second screenshot is showing the configuration you need in order to have actors inactivated and security roles deleted when a resources relationship status changes. In this case, it's when it changes to term involuntary or term voluntary. And those values themselves are actually configured by you. So when we go through the design process, we figure out what relationship statuses do you need for your organization. And then again, we can take it a step further and say if someone goes into one of these relationship statuses, should something change with their security, with their actor, with their roles, etc. Configuration can also be taken a step further to auto-provision additional elevated roles during the transfer, promote, or add work assignment process. And this works by adding or removing roles based on a user's actual position code. So quite a bit of flexibility here. We've seen this, like I said, it is somewhat new, but we've seen it work pretty slick. So now let's start to think about and talk through what can you do right now even to prepare your organization for an implementation of GHR. So the first thing to think about is to take a look at your position and supervisor structure. When I think about this, I think of some questions you might want to ask yourself. So does true position management exist today in the system, or is it just a list of codes? If you do have a structure, is it accurate? For those of you using Manager Self-Service, I would imagine your structure is in pretty good shape. Some customers, though, simply have a list of codes with no reporting relationships defined on HR07 or your supervisor screen. So in GHR, a position and supervisor structure must be defined. You can't just have a supervisor role sitting out there not reporting to anybody. And so a large part of what we configure and design in GHR is this structure, which includes default rules and reporting relationships. And you can see in the screenshot here, this is what your supervisor structure would look like once it's defined. And again, you can see there's a vacant role there. And this whole structure is very critical for the routing and approvals within your action requests, which again would be your hire, transfer, terminate, etc. So you can also take a look at all your HR codes today. Do you have duplicates? Do you use all the values that are flagged as active? I would say there's no time too soon to start looking at this. Clean these up. And it's not to say that we're going to take every single code exactly as it is and put it in GHR, but the more legwork you can do now to figure out, are these codes even used? Do we have duplicates? Whatever it might be, it's just going to make our design and configuration in GHR that much easier. And then the next thing here, I would say is not the most common, but there are many times when customers are converting data from multiple legacy systems. Actually, the case of the project I'm on right now, we are converting from 4 legacy systems. So, I think a lot of the pain and struggles they've felt through the design process has been figuring out how they want to standardize. And again, what codes do they even use today? And it's not to say that can't be done during the project timeline, but I think if some of that analysis had been done prior to the project, we would have been able to get through defining all their codes and consolidating them and making them enterprise-wide much quicker than we were able to. So, something just to think about it. If you are coming from more than one system, start thinking through how you want that final enterprise listing of codes to look like. And lastly here, it's always very beneficial if your current business processes are documented. Now, we've seen this detail range from maybe a 10-page detailed process document to someone saying, well, we have an analyst who's been in this role for 15 years. They don't need documentation. They know what they're doing. So while it's not critical that you have everything defined in detail, it does always help to have at least, some kind of rough checklist or screenshots of the basic steps. Because the more you can provide to us, the quicker we can understand your current state and transform that to a future state in GHR and talent management. So one final thing to think about, if you've not already, is how will data entry and maintenance occur? Will it be centralized, or will it be pushed out to each region or location to manage? Again, answers to these questions just really help Intellius understand your overall vision and goals, and the quicker we can get to that understanding, the quicker we can get to future business processes for you. So now let's talk through some technical items. I would say the theme of this slide is mod migration. So what we've done here is laid out the various technical tools used for customizations in version 10 and what extensibility tools these map to in version 11. Some key takeaways I would say are many of your modifications you have today may not be needed. And the reason is not because you no longer need that functionality, it's because that functionality may already be built into GHR. Of course, GHR was built after Infor had years and years of experience with Lawson HCM. So they've taken, into consideration a lot of these custom solutions that clients have put in, and they've just made a much more mature product in GHR. So before you're quick to look at your list of modifications and say, well, I've got 1,000 things to migrate, hopefully Intellius can help you go through that and kind of map, well, you may have had to do a customization in Lawson S3 today, but GHR already has that as delivered functionality. Another takeaway would be it is quicker to build solutions with these new extensibility tools. When I think about the functionality that exists in Configuration Console, it just really allows you to jump to an end result faster than, for example, writing a 500-line COBOL program. So again, Intellius will absolutely be able to look at your list, help you figure out what tools can we use, what functionality exists. Bottom line, we'll be able to provide solutions and the tools to migrate or have this functionality that you have today in tomorrow's land. Okay, let's talk about configuration console and how the code, I'll say, quote, stacks up. So we have this depicted as a pyramid here. And if we start at the bottom, you'll find the delivered application code. So this is base code for menus, forms, pages, etc. This is what's delivered to you out of the box. Then on top of this are our configurations. An example of a configuration might be adding a field to a resource profile or making a field required on the hire action. Configurations are that default global view, so everyone does see them, but they sit on top of the delivered code and you're not modifying the actual base code. So I think that's something to kind of get your head wrapped around, where, again, many times I think in Lawson S3, clients are modifying base code. This is truly sitting on top. Again, why we have it shown as a pyramid here. Then on the top of the pyramid are personalizations, which I mentioned these before. These are essentially personalized to each individual user, but it does override any configurations that you have. So there might be added flexibility for end users if you allow them to personalize a form, to add fields, to do whatever. But on the other side of that, it can also create a bit of a technical support nightmare since it, again, is overriding any configurations on the form. So we typically push clients to only allow very few individuals, if any, to have this personalization access. But it is there if it's something that you want to implement for your users. Now here we want to show an example and a use case for configuration console. So in this scenario, we have user-defined fields as well as a user-defined business class. And a business class is essentially a table in Landmark. So as you can see, a user-defined business class was created to store state classification values that will be assigned to a position. What's nice about this solution is it allows end users to maintain their own values in the table. We're not hard coding them, in the system via configuration console. And then this delivered position form was modified through configuration console to display that user field, which end users can then view, obviously, and maintain. They can change the values on it. All right, so a few final notes about your implementation before we jump into the demo. So when you start to create your roadmap, and plot out how your organization will implement these modules and manage the change management, here's a few pointers to think about. Plan on an 8 to 12 month project to implement core GHR. Once this core is in place, you can, of course, implement any module we saw listed in the boxes on the earlier slide. And again, that's not to say you can't implement something alongside Global HR. We just find that a lot of customers, because of the change management, because of what it takes to get Global HR running, they like to focus on that first and get that stable and then start to move on to other modules. We also like to say, try to plan your benefits and absence to be included in the move with payroll. But again, every organization varies, and you may have very valid reasons for wanting to take benefits to talent management right now, with GHR. An example we ran across recently was the customer really has no open enrollment portal today, and it would be a huge win to leverage Infor's open enrollment platform. So these are all the types of conversations, and with our experience, we can ask you the right questions to figure out what is your situation. We don't have a roadmap of how everyone should do it because there's not one way to do this. The only thing that has to happen is you have to start with that core GHR. So Intellius is absolutely happy to talk through your current situation and help you create that roadmap. Okay, so let's now go into the live demo. However, before I actually jump into the system, I want to share a document here that Infor delivers with each application release. So this document outlines all of the action requests in terms of how they route, what fields are available, what fields are required, really at each approval level. So as I've mentioned a few times now, GHR automates your business processes, such as hire, rehire, transfer, terminate, through what's called an action request. And when we think about the definition of an action request, it's really an IPA, Infor Process Automation, running behind the scenes, as well as data entry forms within the application. So what you're seeing here is kind of showing you all of that. It's showing you at the top that there's 3 levels of approval that the IPA is going through. And then on the left, it's showing you all the fields that are included on the form at each level of approval. So these, of course, are configurable by you, but it's always nice to have a starting point to work from. A lot of the design work that is done up front is to determine how you want each action request or business process to function. Do you even want or need approvals? Maybe you're a very, I don't want to say simple, but you have simple business processes in your organization and you just need an immediate approval on this. Or do you need to add more levels than 3? What fields do you anticipate being populated at each level? Where and when do you need emails sent out? What fields need to be required, etc. So for those that have done, approval flows in S3, it's a pretty similar concept. So this document would be used to design your organization's action requests, alongside the future state diagrams that Intellius develops during our design phase. All right, so if we jump into the system now, I am logged in right now as a generalist. I am the initiator for this. So if I go to Resources, Hire a Resource, my hire form should pop up here in a minute. Okay, so this is the form that as a generalist I would be filling out. So I'm going to just start filling out, for purposes of this demo, pretty minimal information. But a first name, a last name, and of course anywhere you see the little magnifying glass, that's where you can do a drop-down list and select your values. I happen to just know what these values are, but I'll just show an example here. So here's all my different work types. And then I'll put in, oops. And again, as you're looking at this form, start thinking, what would my initiator, whoever that may be at your organization, what would they know? What would I want them to enter? Some clients like to take it down to only showing the fields that will be entered and required, where others are more, give me all the fields and the person entering the data will know what to enter. But these are all the things that, again, you're going to design with both your application lead and your technical lead, and you will get a request to hire a resource form that is pretty tailored to your business. Okay, we'll put in a start date. Now, I think I mentioned earlier that one of the things with positions is to figure out, not only your position and manager structure, but also how you want your default rules to work. Pretty similar to, to Lawson S3, where there's various fields that you can default with, either default no override, default with override, or no default. Same thing in talent management. So you'll see in a minute here when I type in, I know I want position 12 in this case. When I type that in, my values should default. And there they are. It's pulled in an org unit for me. It's pulled in a location, work schedule, shift. Again, this is all configurable in your position setup. So we'll give this guy a pay rate. And then I think final is just an address. And again, I'm just filling in what I know is needed to make this go through. Okay, now as the initiator, when I hit submit, I am not putting this in the database yet. It still has 2 levels of approval to go through. So when I hit submit in a minute here, the box will go away. And if we just go back here, what should happen next is it should go to the manager. And I can see I get a message that says, hey, this hire resource was initiated. Now I want to show a screenshot here of an email that gets sent to the manager. And when you think about your emails, if you don't have email automation today, some of the things to think about are how many do you want to be sending out? I've seen a lot of clients up front, they want an email for every single thing that happens. And all of a sudden they get to testing and realize people are getting 15, 20 emails a day. They're not reading them. It essentially becomes spam. So what we like to say is kind of think through your user base. In this case, if I'm a manager and I'm hiring someone, I probably need an email saying, hey, this is out there ready for you to review, because unless I'm hiring people every day, I'm probably not always in the system looking at my in-basket. But on the other hand, someone like a generalist or an administrator or a recruiter, we may not want to send them emails because part of their daily job is logging into the system and going through their to-do list in Infor. So again, just some things to think about as you think about when and where and who do I want to send emails to. But in the case of this, delivered with the hire action request, an email does get sent to the manager saying the action to hire X person has been initiated. It needs your review and approval, and you can review this request in your in-basket. Again, this is a screenshot from from someone I hired prior. I just wanted to show you what the format of the email looks like. So if we go back in the system, I'm going to toggle over and become a manager. Now, for purposes of the demo, this is all happening under my user ID, but obviously in real life, this would be 3 separate people logging in. You're not going to have the generalist, the manager, and the administrator all be physically the same person. But we can get around that here, like I said, by saying, okay, now I'm logging in as the manager role. So if I go up to my name and my in-basket, and click specifically on my name, I can see I've got a few things out here. Now, this list is configurable. Maybe you want to see the name of the person or whatever. I just know that it's the latest, highest work unit. The email also you can have show the work unit. Again, since this was from prior, work unit 24 doesn't make sense for what we're doing. So I'm going to pull up the latest one here, which is 58. And now I, as the manager, have the opportunity to review this, make changes, do what I need to do. It's going to be a very similar look and feel. You may just, in the case of what's delivered, there was that work type field, if you remember, where I chose FT for full-time. It's not showing for a manager because out of the box, Infor has determined that's not really a field we'd ever want manager touching. And again, you get to decide. Maybe you don't even want them to see or whatever certain fields or be able to update them. So again, I'm here as a manager. Oh, no, you know what? We negotiated a higher salary for this guy. So I'm going to put, oops, that is a rather large salary. We're going to do $55,000 instead of $50,000. So I'm going to change that. Everything else looks good to me. I'm going to hit approve. We're not done yet. 3 levels of approval. So we'll let this go through. And then I will log in or toggle over to be the final approver, which would be the administrator in this case. So if I go back up here, just go in as administrator. Again, go into my in-basket, But in this case, I want to click on the HR Administrator in basket, as that's where it's being directed. There's my work unit 58 again. So if I click on that, now, one thing that I would say, as a, anywhere there's a final approver, you're probably going to want to show every single field that someone has had input to, because you really wouldn't want someone approving something without seeing or knowing what values have been entered. So by the time you get to this final approver, you should see all the fields. But again, like the manager, I have the opportunity to change anything I need to. I can add a comment. So I'll just, add a comment here. And now when I hit approve as the final approver, this should now hit the database. And I'll show you in a minute here. I'll go back as a manager, and I should be able to see this resource under my staff. Now, another email that does go out, delivered, is back to the initiator. Not telling them to do anything, just saying, hey, by the way, we know you initiated this hire. It's now been approved, it's completed, and here's the employee number. So let's go back as manager. Go to my staff. And hopefully as I'm going through and toggling between the different roles here, you're also seeing what I was talking about earlier with user experience. Manager has these quick links, has a different set of menu items up here than an administrator does. So that's all part of that role-defined experience. And here is John Carpenter. So if I open him up, well, okay, it's not going to let us see him. I don't know why that happened, but it should have pulled up his record. I'll just scroll down. I have a screenshot of that. In this case, back to the Justin Thomas that I was showing the emails for, it would pull up his record. You could see all this information on him, his work assignment, personal information, etc. Okay, so that ends the demo portion. I think, Ryan, you had a few final closing thoughts you wanted to go through. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, that was great. The magic of a live demo never fails right there towards the end, but thanks for capturing that screenshot for us. Okay, so now that you've heard from our expert, I did want to summarize a little bit on how we at Intellius can help add value as you prepare for GHR. And we talked about this a little bit early on, but one of the best ways to get started is to ensure that a full review of your current setup and configuration has been taken into consideration. Whether you're upgrading to GHR or migrating from another system, a thorough assessment will greatly improve the success of your project and also ensure that you're getting the most out of your new system. Our business process assessment, or BPA for short, we've got some screenshots here. It's the culmination of a series of on-site meetings with you and your team to walk through current processes, data setup, and system configuration. We then analyze what we've collected, and the result is a very clear deliverable with recommendations based on best practices and the knowledge that comes from this team that's got many projects and many years under their belt. As Allison pointed out earlier, one of the best ways to prepare for an easier transition is to clean up or restructure your current HR data so that it will be optimized for GHR. In addition to that, our technical team, as we talked about, can help analyze existing customizations and third-party integrations. We'll then work with you and your team to develop and execute a plan to migrate these changes in any one of the tools that Allison explained, these changes and these integrations, and put them into your new system. Another value add from, excuse me, Intellius is our longevity in this space. We were early adopters and began working with GHR and talent management in their infancy, as I pointed before. We've been a part of its evolution into the most current set of modules, and from this longevity comes a really deep understanding and knowledge of the product, not only from an implementation standpoint, but also from the end user point of view as well. And having completed many implementations for many clients, it's also allowed us to understand how GHR can add value to organizations across any industry. On top of this, one last point, I also want to highlight the importance of working with a certified partner, one that can help work closely with Infor when needed. As the product has evolved, so has our team. Our team of experts has continued to work with Infor to maintain our certifications to ensure that we're delivering an effective solution for all of our clients. Okay, so with that, that wraps up the overview portion of our webinar. As I mentioned before, we'd like to open it up for questions that you might have. You can either unmute, or we can unmute you. You can say those verbally or type those into the chat box down below, and we'll keep an eye on that here. We'll be on the phone for a little while. And if you'd rather, obviously, you can reach out to us directly. There's Allison's information and my information. We also have a general information, info@intellius.net. You can reach out to us. I know we've been speaking to many of you already, so feel free to call us as well. We do have one question here already, and that